Glad to be here.
Well, there's a lot of exciting things happening right now in the industry. We know right now Pack Expo and Assembly are happening this week as well. So we're excited that you're joining us, or if you're watching this at a later time as well, we're excited that you pulled this up. Today we're going to be talking about something really interesting, and I think it's exciting as we see automation and robotics moving into different industries and really feeling fulfilling the need that a lot of people are needing in terms of labor shortage being such a problem in the industry. We're talking about palletization and the food industry, and I think it's pretty exciting. So, I mean, Ryan and Nick, from your experience so far, what are you guys hearing as a lot of the challenges that manufacturers are facing when it comes to food producers in this space?
Yeah, so it's a lot of the same of what we're hearing across the board for manufacturers, but I think some of the pressures are hitting in different ways, right? So labor challenges for sure is a big one. I think in particular when we're talking about palletizing, like we're talking about today, those very manual labor intensive tasks often can be very hard to fill, right? Because you got people who come in and do that job and maybe they're not physically up to it, or maybe they just don't find it mentally engaging, and so it becomes hard to retain those workers. So I think that's a particular challenge here. I think there's labor crisis in general, but I think that it's particularly relevant when it comes to those physically demanding jobs. But other things like inflation and some of these other challenges and trends that we're seeing more globally as well are definitely affecting food manufacturers.
Absolutely. Nick, what about you?
Yes, so I think one of the things to add on top of it is that these different challenges, so inflation, labor shortage, and all, it's all competing against the energy that the manufacturer can spend on one or the others. So that's all good examples. So yeah, that's what I would add.
Yeah, the thing that comes to my mind right away is when we were looking at the state of manufacturing a couple years ago, and the pandemic was just starting in all that area. A lot of people couldn't be fulfilling those jobs, couldn't be working on a line, couldn't be doing a lot of those tasks because of the risk that manufacturers had. And I think what we saw is the manufacturers who adapted automation at an early stage. We saw that they were able to keep up with production, keep up with demand in a lot of areas because their risk a lot of times was not in that workforce. When you had limited staff in a lot of areas, people could then keep the production going when a robot could do that task and area. And what we're finding out now coming out of this pandemic a couple years later is the labor is still a massive problem that we're facing in the industry. Labor shortages there, and a lot of times it's difficult to get people to want to do this job over and over during a 10-hour shift of doing end-of-line palletization, end-of-line pack out. It's a big thing where just people don't find the drive in that area. And I think that's what we're seeing when it comes to the challenges in that area. From a cultural perspective, it's difficult for people to do. From a resource perspective, it's hard for a lot of times manufacturers to just get people to come and work and saying, hey, you're going to joining our company and you're going to be doing this end of the line thing. It's hard for people to do. So I think what we're seeing in a lot of areas is automation, in this case robotics, driving one of those things forward. Now, we want to talk a little bit about traditional automation. I think traditional industrial robots is a thing that we're looking at, and for a long time, manual palletization was a big thing that's out there. There was a lot of stuff, but as Ryan, thank you for driving these slides here. We saw a lot of ergonomic issues when it comes to a lot of repetitive tasks. That's where a lot of injuries that were happening. It is time consuming. There's human potential where really there's opportunities for people to be doing better jobs somewhere else, where it's not just this boring dull area. And I think what we're seeing today is tasks can be automated better with robots. But when we look at the traditional sense of what automation was several years ago, it was collaborative robots weren't as in depth in manufacturing as we once saw. It was very heavily industrial robotic systems, but there was a lot of I think risks, when it came to that. There was a lot of investment. Ryan, I'd love for you to touch on that. What were some of the biggest things that prevented manufacturers in the past from putting robotic applications out there using industrial robots?
Yeah, and you know, I know it took me a minute to get there on the slides that we have to share just as kind of a visual, but you know, ultimately what you're often looking at is something like this when it comes to a palletizing, kind of a more traditional automated palletizing work cell. And this is kind of what a lot of people's mind goes to is, all right, well, we can either do this fully manually and have all the ergonomic risks and all the things we talked about, or we can do it fully automated and have it be kind of take up a huge amount of floor space with big cages and really, really heavy duty industrial robots with a very complex integration process that's going to take months to deploy and probably millions of dollars for some work cells to deploy automated robotics. But all that knowledge base is being outsourced. So you have to find someone who can do that work. And they're obviously in very high demand, but at the same time, those costs, the supply chain challenges that we're all seeing, they're facing as well. There's a lot of equipment that has to go into a fully automated end-of-line palletizing system, like the traditional way of doing it, where you're involving a lot more machinery, a lot more traditional equipment.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the big thing that we're looking at is a lot of companies out there are small to medium-sized businesses or small to medium-sized producers where they don't necessarily always have a entire controls engineering robot programmers on their team to handle a lot of these tasks. We're seeing a lot of times for these companies who want to introduce palletizing for the first time, they might not have a lot of robotic experience before. And a lot of times when you're bringing in these industrial robots, there's a lot of really you have to bring in a systems integrator or a big company that can handle that size piece of equipment.
Yep.
And a
One
lot of
thing,
times when you're doing
oh,
that, the lead times or the time to market, on doing that. I can't imagine a lot of cases right now, if you're wanting to order a new piece of equipment right now, you're 6, 9, 12 months out before you would even get that piece of equipment on your floor just because of how much the demand is out there. A lot of times custom industrial robot application systems take a long time to deploy and to build out. And I think that's just the biggest thing when we're looking from a risk perspective. That's what we're looking at. Now, when we can look at, okay, so what are the other options out there? What else can we see? I think, we're looking at, there might be, Cobot solutions. And that's kind of what we're talking about today is Cobot solutions. And there's another slide that we're going to bring up where collaborative robotic palletizing is one of those things where it might be a new solution for us that that companies can explore.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the things that I'll talk about for a quick second here is just some of the things that we've observed when it comes to figuring out what is right for you. Is Cobot palletizing the right solution, or is more traditional full factory kind of palletizing the right solution? Part of it is kind of, well, thinking about what kind of maintenance is going to be involved. How involved do you as an organization want to be in the process? Do you want to fully have it be hands off, or do you want to get involved in some way or be able to kind of upskill your workforce? In terms of that overall cost of the system, what does it take to run versus what does it just cost on the initial upfront costs themselves? And then of course you want to make sure that things are safe. So what does that look like? Are you going to have to exclude all your workers from the area, or is it something where you could be kind of sharing workspace like a collaborative robot, for example? And that's where I think you were getting to, Jake, is of course with Robotiq, our philosophy is really we want to not just automate the process, but help you to elevate your workforce. And if you're looking for something that can be done flexibly, quickly, that's why we've developed the Robotiq Palletizing Solution for that much more lightweight, more nimble deployment for kind of handling that end-of-line palletizing task.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the biggest things that we're seeing right away is what's separating an industrial robot palletization system versus a collaborative robot palletization is just we're seeing positives and we're seeing capability on both sides, right? We know that an industrial robot is a higher payload, higher speed application in a lot of cases, but a lot of times for the food industry, It's a lot different than the automotive industry, where a lot of times we're palletizing a tire or a metal component or a part. In this case, when we're looking at food, the food industry, the food casing is not always as heavy, and that's why a lot of times we might see value being driven from a Cobot palletizing solution. Now, Nick, I want to kind of bring in your expertise a little bit, and when we're looking at this stuff, can you walk us through what a solution looks like or what the process looks like from an end user perspective or from a partner perspective on how you would go about beginning to deploy and determining if a solution like this would be working for them?
Yeah, sure. And while I'm pulling up the slides, one thing that I would, or maybe, yeah, just one second, I'll take control out of it. So one of the things that I would add on top of what you mentioned is that industrial robots, basically, it's a big jump when you have to change all the layout of the full factory. So that's something that with Cobot it's possible to do incremental automation, which is much more applicable to the food industry. Just give me 1 second. All right. So can you confirm that everything is all set?
Yes, we see the screen.
All right, perfect. So I think one of the things that is really interesting once you start a project is to have a clear view from the start about what it's going to look like. And with the palletizing application, it's something that is really interesting, is that it's a very standard application. It's something that if you look at different side, different customer, different use cases, it's going to be different from case to case, but the vast majority of the application will be quite similar. So we are moving cardboard boxes for most situation from a conveyor to a pallet. So it's easy to standardize the way it's going to be deployed. And if we have a standard way of deploying, it's a lot easier to simulate it. So that's something that is interesting, is that with Cobot palletizing, it's easy to have a clear view of what it would look like and the kind of results you would get from such a system. So that's why on our website at robotiq.com, you'll be able to find what we call the online configurator, which is basically a simulator where you input the application details that you want to accomplish with the palletizer. So the box dimensions, the pallet size, how the box or position, the label, orientation of the boxes if it needs to be specific. And the system will determine by itself what kind of configuration, what kind of tooling you need, and what kind of speed you can achieve through it, so that you have a clear understanding from the start if it's going to work or not. So that's something that usually with industrial robots, it's a lot of custom design, and it requires a lot of time just to know what it's going to look like. So if you're able to use a standard product, you get answers quickly. So that's a good start.
And I think what we have in the next slide, Nick, is, we can go out there and you can look at what your standard pallet is built by. And then from that, you can say, okay, does my current pallet design fit within the scope or the working range that the palletization system has? Or if it doesn't, can we then build our new pallets in a way that are much more efficient and then can be stacked as well? So here's an example. So it looks like we're max pallet height, we can do up to 108 inches or 2750 millimeters.
Yep, exactly. And this kind of pallet height is quite high. Most of the case, it's under this. So in many situations, you will see from the simulation that this product that you're seeing on the screen with this kind of tooling is able to match the application requirements. So if you get a standard product, you're able to know the pricing that you'll get for the whole system very rapidly. So we're able to help on that, and it helps to start the discussion to have a clear view of what needs to be done. But that's, from we call the design place, where I have the discussions about what it would look like. The interesting thing about Cobot palletizing and with our solution more specifically is that once you decide to go forward and go into production, the integration time is a lot reduced. So by building on standard products, the amount of work that is required to have one robot in production is reduced compared to all these custom-made solutions. So that's something that will enable a fast deployment. And regardless of the person that is actually doing deployment, if it's a lean integrator or if it's a do-it-yourself approach, the fact that it's being made faster, it really helps, and it helps deploy more system more rapidly. So as you see here, we have different components that are all tied together. So the pallet sensors, the tower light showing the actual status of the system, all the motion of the linear axis that is responsible for controlling the robot and the linear axis in a coordinated fashion. It's all done, all pre-wired, all pre-integrated. So that's a lot of things you don't need to worry about.
And I think one of the exciting things here that we look at is when we look at traditional automation, it's one of those things where you don't know if your application is going to work or not. We're here from an end user perspective. You can go in here and plug in some of the information, and you'll be able to determine right away if this is a solution that's going to work for you or not, where it's not one of those things where you have to invest a bunch of time into figuring out, is this going to work for me? With going online, it sounds like so far with the information we're being provided, it's going to be a pretty clear understanding of if this palletization system is going to work or not. Is that right?
Yep, exactly. That's the whole purpose of the whole system. Yep.
Well, I think the other thing, Nick, is that with the configuration side of things, it's all based on kind of real world simulation data. So you're not just getting a rough estimate. You should have a pretty accurate sense of how many boxes per minute, for example, whether the reach range is going to work. So it's going to simulate that full application. You'll actually see it kind of play out live for you, and you can share it as well to kind of get that visual of, will it do my own product?
Yes, exactly. So on the configurator, and just pulling back to see what you would have on the website, the actual software that is doing the simulation is the exact same software running on the robot. So there's no difference using the payload. The motion is calculated in the same way that it would be done on the real motion. So basically, it's what you can expect with the real system. Yeah. So. And once you've got everything set up, and we have examples, we'll be able to show of systems that were, you're able to install it in one day. You're able to get your first pallet done in one day. Of course, usually the way it's put into production, you take the other some time to train all the staff and make sure that you integrate this in your own process. But the integration time can go really quick. So that's a big advantage of it. So there's the hardware part that we've seen, everything connected all together. And there's also the software part of it, which is a key component. And the hardware and the software, when it's all designed together, like our palletizing solution for a standard application like palletizing, the software will help the hardware and vice versa. It's all tied together. So as you'll see, the different steps that are required to program the actual pallet pattern, the fact that the software knows all the cell, what it looks like and where the obstacles are, it's really smooth all the integration process on the trajectory generation, for example. So these 3 steps here, really the box definition, the dimensions, the pallets, and the pattern is really the only 3 steps that you need to do to make the application work. So the first one is really just, here's the dimensions of the box, where depending on when they arrive on the conveyor, where the robot needs to pick it. We call it the grip position. So the grip position is the only position that you need to program on the robot. Everything else is calculated automatically because the pallet is referenced with our base. So once you get the payload, label orientation, if it's required or not, you have this first step defined. So it's really done in a natural way using just the dimensions. The pallet, are you palletizing on the left, the right, or both pallets? That's here that you can define this. And once you are ready, you can define how the patterns are going to be built. So how the boxes are positioned on the pallet, how the labels are oriented. You can have alternate patterns on each of the layers so that you have a more stable pallet. So basically all the pallet, the way you want it to be built, you tell it to the system in a really visual way right on the robot itself. So it's very easy to get this all tied together.
So this is really being designed around just a recipe type format where we can go in there if we have the understanding of what our box looks like, what our pallet looks like, what the levels in the stacking area, we can then build that. And I think that's the big thing as well, is a lot of times if you're deploying your solution on your own, you have to build in all of the different locations for drop-off points and all this. This is being built into the software. So when you go through that configurator, in a sense of your boxes, your pallet size, your location, and all that, the system will automatically build all of that for you. And I think, Ryan, when we were talking earlier, we're looking at an example where, you know, a customer was unboxing or uncrating the system in the morning, and in the afternoon they were already doing a runoff of you know, building a pallet.
Exactly. And that speed to set up doesn't just apply for, you know, deploying with one product, let's say. I think one of the big themes that I've seen walking through different plants is they've got various lines running product for Costco, Sam's Club, you know, BJ's, you know, the kind of warehouse type stores, and then maybe your local grocery store, and then a CVS Walgreens gets a different pack, right? So you've got these different varieties of package dimensions and things that you have to produce for different retail clients. And so the ability to set that up quickly also comes into play when you want to set up a new job because your box dimensions are changed, or maybe you've got a different pallet size that's going out somewhere else. You can very quickly define all of that in, I mean, really 5-10 minutes time, and you're running an entirely new pallet setup. And you can save that to the robot so that next time you just go file, load, and run that exact same SKU all over again. And as Jake, as you mentioned, the robot is going to be figuring out all of those paths automatically on its own. So we don't have to do any kind of manual teaching of those processes. The movements, the robot's going to calculate those most efficient motions on its own, incorporating that vertical axis, which lifts the robot up to build the higher pallets as well. So it's all coordinated from the control side. You know, so really all you have to do is input those recipes, and the output is palletizing. Once we finish doing this, you're actually putting boxes on pallets.
Awesome.
Yep. And one of the things that makes it possible is that, you know, this product was designed specifically for universal robots. So the fact that we are using a standard platform and we don't make a product that is going to work on all the robot brands, it really allows us to tie our own product into the system of the robot. So everything is taken into account automatically. Even the shape of the robot itself, it's really specific. We have the 3D, you know, shape of the robot that is taken into account all that motion planning. So that smooth motion generation will really avoid all obstacles because it knows where all the obstacles are. So that's quite an advantage for that system.
Awesome. So can we talk about some examples of cases that you guys have done in the past where what some deployments have looked like, what that program looks like, and, you know, how we've seen success or what different companies have done for that deployment?
Yes, sure. So let's give a few examples. So like this one, and I won't go into the details of what each of the products are being palletized, but just to give the story behind these cases. So this is the example we were discussing before, where our distributor basically arrived on site at the customer, at the end user in the morning, and in the afternoon they were able to do their first pallet. So really it shows that this one-day installation, doing first pallets really quickly, is something that has been proven over time. It's been almost 2 years since we've launched the product. We are almost at 200 palletizers deployed. So that's something that really we've been able to see over time, many times, that speed to deployment and really going faster. So the typical way it is done is you often get an expert that will do the installation and the integration and being able to train all the staff on site to be able to be autonomous. But once that system is deployed, the operation itself, it's really the manufacturer that they take control of their machine. So what you've seen in the previous part about the visual way to define how a product is being palletized, this is easy enough. That's the only step that is required to actually add a new product. So it's really easy to switch from one product to the other and also to add new products. And that's typically the way it's done. So non-experts are able to operate this very easily. And in the food industry, we typically see this as the maintenance team of the manufacturer that is able to take care of that whole process. So that's an example. Here's another one where we have been able to show that, you know, sometimes in a manufacturing line, the same person is actually doing more than one task. And when the person that is doing the palletizing is also responsible of other task upstreams, it's difficult to get the full potential of the line. And using this palletizer, in this example with this manufacturer, it was possible to increase the production level of the whole line. So that's something that is an enabler in many ways, where using all the equipment in the line, using that additional automation part, and that's really just an incremental automation, will allow the same staff level to produce a lot more.
And what does the power demand look like for this? If we were going out there and we wanted to deploy a solution like this, what's the requirements? A lot of times we're going to need air for application. What's the power that a lot of these systems are going to require?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And so the robot, and one that's key of the Cobot versus the industrial robots, is this robot, and even with the palletizer, with the linear axis, everything can be plugged in a standard electrical outlet. So the 15 amps that you have everywhere, it's what we would typically be using.
And I think that's a big thing as well. When you look at deployment, you don't need to go out there. You don't need to go back to your MCC and go back to your box and figure out how to put down a 220 or a 3-phase drop or something like that. You have the ability just to plug into a standard 110 outlet receptacle and be able to bring the solution up and get growing. That's exciting. So what are some other ones that we're looking at, Nick? I know we're about wrapping up on time. We have about 4 or 5 minutes left. Is there another example that you'd want to share just as a good case study that we saw?
Yes. So one other example that I could talk about is just to show the variety of different applications that we made. We've discussed about the different pallet heights that we're able to cover, up to 108 inches. So that's something that we can see examples of palletizers being deployed where that makes the difference. You know, our system, if you compare it to other Cobot palletizers, the stroke of the linear axis and just the way the software manages the trajectory, the way we optimize all the design, our palletizer can do a lot more than the typical alternative that we see. Just so that, you know, basically if you look at doing palletizing with a universal robot, with our solution, you're able to do to get the most out of your Cobot, basically.
Awesome. Fantastic. Well, what are some takeaways that, Ryan, that you want from this webinar? I think the biggest thing for me that as a takeaway that I saw was the ease of just being able to understand if the solution is or is not going to work for you. I mean, that's the biggest value that I see, where a lot of times in the industry, I'm going out there, I'm trying to find a million different opportunities or options. With this, the configurator is the biggest thing that I saw, where I say, okay, does this fit within the constraints of how I'm building my pallet? Does this fit within the constraints of what my box looks like and the weight that I need to move? And then from that, what does that deployment look like? So that was the big thing that I took away. Ryan, what about you?
Yeah, I think it's a great point. That's a great first place to start, is to hop over and take a look at the configurator. Of course, you know, a lot of you out there this is probably your first automation project that you're considering for end-of-line palletizing, let's say. And sometimes for some of you, many of you, it might even be your first robotics project. And first of all, cobots are an incredibly great way to start because of that accessibility, the ability to get into it easily and quickly. You know, a lot of the hardware we're talking about is available within 2 weeks. You can be palletizing on your floor in terms of getting a hold of everything. But to me, another big takeaway is what we call return on learning. So it's not just what is the return on the investment, it's also what are you going to gain by learning to deploy robots or cobots specifically on your plant floor. How are you going to help kind of elevate that workforce team, the people who are doing just the physical palletizing? Well, they can kind of up their game and contribute more to your business and ultimately add more value to your end customer. And so what I would say is, let us help you determine if that application is a good fit right through that configurator. If yes, you're automated in weeks, not months. And if it's not a good fit, even we've got a global set of partners throughout the world who we can connect you with for maybe something else that might work for you with cobots. Let's say if it's not palletizing, that's the right fit for you. And ultimately, it's a choice, right? Are you going to try to tackle and solve some of these challenges and learn about cobots, or what is that going to look like? So I think it's something we can definitely help with and help determine if it's a good fit.
Perfect. Nick, what about you? Any final takeaways?
Yes, so I think for me in the past, the palletizing application, it was either fully manual or big project, multi-million, you need to change your whole factory. And now with these kind of solution, it's possible to do incremental automation. So you have a line where you have someone doing the task, and now it's possible to use an affordable system that is quickly deployed. So that makes a big difference. You don't need to have the big cash flow to do everything all at once, and building a new building almost to be able to start automation. You can do it step by step, and it's a lot easier to do.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for joining us on our first of 3 webinars with Automation Talks. Our next one is going to be coming up soon, so make sure you register for that event. And then as always, Ryan and Nick, thank you both for joining us as well for this webinar, and we'll see all of you soon. Take care.